In January 2022, Kohei Uchimura retired from competitive gymnastics. He won 7 Olympic and 21 World Championship medals throughout his career, and it marked the end of an era. The first gymnastics competition I ever watched on the television was the 2004 Athens Olympic Games, in which Alexi Nemov did the most difficult high bar routine of all time and changed the sport of gymnastics forever. In 1992, at the Barcelona Olympic Games, Vitaly Scherbo won 6 out of 8 potential gold Olympic medals in men's gymnastics, an achievement that is unlikely to ever be repeated. These are my 3 top male gymnasts of all time, and this is my story. So today I'm going to discuss who is the greatest gymnast of all time. The word GOAT gets thrown around a lot. For me, I'm going to pick 3 gymnasts that competed during my lifetime. So prior to that, there were gymnasts like Albert Azarian, Nikolai Andrianov, who was from my coach Sergei's gym. He was actually the most decorated Olympian of all time up until Michael Phelps beat his Olympic record, which I think at the time stood at 15 Olympic gold medals. So, in terms of Olympic gold medals, he's certainly the top of the pile. But for me, I'm going to focus on 3 gymnasts that competed during my lifetime. And the first one I think that was, competing as I was just born and I was a baby was Vitaly Scherbo. And his Olympic record stood at 6 gold and 4 bronze Olympic medals. So he won 10 Olympic medals. And in 1992 at the Barcelona Olympic Games, he won 6 of the 8 potential Olympic gold medals, which is just an achievement that I can't really get my head around. He, amazing. He won the all-around, the team event, and 4 apparatus gold medals. And the first time I ever saw Vitaly Scherbo do gymnastics, it was probably around 2004, 2005 time. Now, back in Notts at the gym at the time, over where the boys section is, where the high bar is, and the poster that I've got up there now is up there, and it's got the inspiring quote on it. Just underneath that were our lockers where we'd put all our kit and stuff. And there was like a TV, an old TV inside a padlocked locker. And every now and then, the head coach at the time, Barry Winch, he'd gather us all around and he'd say, all right, I've got a video for you guys to watch. And on this one occasion, he brought in the 1992 Olympic Games apparatus finals, and he put the VHS tape in. We're all sat around like the high bar, everybody sat on mats and stuff. It'd be a cool thing to watch from afar now, seeing all these young kids like watching this old school TV. Still got that grainy kind of fuzz on it when you rewind it and fast it forward. And he put the floor final on. And it was actually also the first time I'd ever seen a triple somersault before in gymnastics. And I can remember thinking, whoa, that's just unbelievable. And a Chinese gymnast called Li Zhaoshuang had done a triple back somersault on the floor. But Vitaly Scherbo did his floor routine. It was an incredible floor routine. And I can remember just the first thing that stood out to me was he was an incredible gymnast, and he was doing beautiful gymnastics. So he wasn't just doing difficult gymnastics, he was making it look like artwork, and it's artistic gymnastics, right? So that's kind of your job. But the big thing was like he just had this massive smile, just this big smile, and he just looked like he loved performing. Like if it wasn't gymnastics, he'd have been on the stage. He was an entertainer, performer, and you could really feel like the emotion in his performance. And that was the first time I saw him. And a few years later, I'd kind of been mesmerized by watching him on that TV screen with everybody else that first time. And at that time, I'd become a big gymnastics nerd, so I used to watch, when gymnastics was on the TV, I'd watch it all the time, and I kind of scoured the internet looking for these 1992 Barcelona Olympics VHS tapes. And this is at the time when DVDs are out, so like VHS is becoming more rare. I think we still had an old TV in our house with a VHS player on it, and I said, I want that in my bedroom so I could just watch these gymnastics tapes. And I managed to find these Olympic Games on eBay from China. It took 6 weeks for them to get shipped back to the UK. And when I got them, I was so excited, man. I just watched through all of them. And I was just... The gymnastics that he did was just so incredible. He did things that nobody had ever seen before. So he was the first person to cross the rings. So it's banned now. You're not allowed to do it. But in his rings routine, he did swing elements where you go around the rings, but he crossed the rings in half. Just the coolest stuff, really thinking outside of the box. He was incredible on parallel bars. I remember his P-bars routine being amazing, and just, he did everything slightly differently, it really stood out. Just an incredible gymnast. And I think probably his biggest unique achievement was those 6 Olympic gold medals. It's something that I don't think anybody's ever going to do again. Certainly today in gymnastics, you have a lot more specialists. So back then, the real emphasis was on the all-around event. So there were 6 members of a team back then. I think 5 members of a team compete. I think actually, potentially 5 members of the team competed in the qualification. It might have even been 6. It might have been 6 members. So everybody in your team needed to do every event. You couldn't really have a specialist unless they were representing just one nation. So the all-around was the real focus. And it meant that you didn't have so many people that specialised just in one area of gymnastics. So the pommel horse or the high bar, they did everything. So looking back to that time, there were 2 Olympic Games in the 90s, so 92 and 96, where they still did compulsory routines. So for kids now that do gymnastics, they won't know that. They'll know it as their elite grades or their NDPs when you do a basic routine. Everybody does the same routine and you're marked out of 10. We used to have to do that at the elite level of gymnastics. So the best guys in the world would all do their compulsory routines at the start of the Olympic Games and then do their difficult routines. So, yeah, really cool watching that back. How do you set yourself apart from everybody else in the world when they're all doing the same routine? So that used to be really cool, being able to watch that and see that. And, I was a big believer in trying to get the basics right. And Sergey, used to drill me on the basics, the technique, the aesthetics of gymnastics, having a beautiful handstand shape, the lines, as well as the difficulty in doing the big skills. So for me, yeah, that was his big unique achievement. But he was also the only gymnast ever to be a world champion on every single apparatus. So he was world champion on all 6 of the men's apparatus. So that's the floor, the pommel horse, the rings, the vault, the parallel bars, and the high bar. That's such an amazing feat because, the floor is all about your legs, right? The pommel horse is all about your mental strength, your ability to compete under pressure, using your upper body. The rings is just sheer strength. Vault is power, speed, how fast twitched are your muscles, your spatial awareness. Parallel bars is technique, it's very technical apparatus. High bar, how brave are you, courageous, how well can you swing around the bar, how good is your understanding of timing. So he was a world champion on all 6 of those events, And when I work with kids in schools, the first thing I say to them before we do our warm-up is, in gymnastics, you use everything from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. So we've got to warm up our whole body. And it's true, it's one of the only sports where you almost use everything, every muscle. So to have been a world champion on every event is an incredible achievement. Nobody's done it since. He also had won the all-around at the World Championships multiple times and had won the team gold medal. And he was a gymnast that had competed for the Soviet Union, so USSR. And then when the Soviet Union split up in the early 90s, he then went on to compete for Belarus. Now, the type of gymnast that he was, I think, of the 3 gymnasts that are in my top 3, my Mount Rushmore of gymnastics legends, I think he's the most well-rounded. And that goes to showing that achievement of being a world champion on all 6 events. He didn't really have an obvious weakness. He was brilliant on floor, parallel bars, high bar, pommels, even vault, rings. There really wasn't a weakness, And I think that's probably where he stands unique in this top 3, because the other 2 gymnasts, they probably weren't as well-rounded in terms of, there was clearly an apparatus that was a little bit weaker than the rest, whereas for him, he was just a complete all-rounder. Now, after the 1992 Olympic Games, he goes on to move out to the States. He represents Belarus, and at the 1996 Olympic Games, again, he went on and he won a bronze medal in the all-around. But prior to this, in 1995, his wife was in a really serious car accident, so she was very lucky to be alive. He stopped training. He turned to drink and alcohol, lost a lot of time in the gym, and he tried to make a comeback for the 1996 Olympic Games. But you could see that he had, physically, he was in a different shape. You could tell that he had lost a lot of time in the gym, and, he did his best and he did incredibly well. I mean, he still won Olympic medals at that Olympic Games and still doing some incredible gymnastics. But, the rest of the world had kind of caught up with him and moved on a little bit. At that time. So Vitaly Scherbo, yeah, for me, he was, when I think about the performer, he was the best performer for sure, and probably the most well-rounded athlete. It's hard for me to think of a weakness. He really was the best all-around package, as it were, for an Olympic champion. So he won that Olympic Games in 1992 and won 6 gold medals, something that none of the other two gymnasts got close to. But yeah, his reign lasted probably between 1992, 1991 to kind of like 1995, 1996, so 4, 5, 6 years there. But he wasn't always winning everything. And then in 1996 at the Atlanta Olympic Games was when the second gymnast that's in my top 3 was introduced to the world stage. His name was Alexi Nemov. So his Olympic medal tally stands at 4 gold, 2 silver, and 6 bronze. So a lot of Olympic medals. But World Championships, he only had 13, whereas Vitaly Scherbo had 23 World Championship medals, which is just a ridiculous number. But 13 World Championship medals, but a lot of Olympic medals. And his first all-around Olympic medal was at that Games in Athens when he was just 19 years of age. And he actually had a chance to win the gold medal there at that Olympic Games. So on floor, back then, you were able to repeat certain elements, and you could do that on lots of apparatus. So if you repeated certain difficult elements, you got a bit of a bonus. So he had to do straight somersaults, which is where you do a somersault forwards without doing any twists. Had to do 2 in a row and then a full twist. Unfortunately, he was slightly off after his second one, and on the third one, instead of doing the full twist, he just did a straight somersault again. That cost him the Olympic gold medal at 19, but at 19, an incredible achievement. And the first time I saw Alexi Nemov perform gymnastics was 2004. I've spoke about this before. It was first time I watched gymnastics on the TV, the Athens Olympic Games. You know, at the time, up until that, I'd really just been watching the other sports. I remember Kelly Holmes winning 2 Olympic gold medals and that kind of being the standout performance of that Olympic Games. Is that famous photo of her running across the finish line and her eyes like bursting out of her head. But I watched the gymnastics and I watched the high bar final and I saw him do the most incredible routine of all time. He did 6 release and catches. I think that's probably where my love for high bar really began. He did 4 of those release and catches connected together, so without doing a giant in between it. It was amazing. He, incredible routine. Took a step on his dismount. The judges didn't give him a very good score. The crowd were not pleased. They booed for half an hour, stopped the competition. They ended up raising his score, which I still, I spoke about this before recently in the Cheating in Sport episode. I'm not sure how they justified raising his score, because once you've given him the score, you can't take it back. But they raised the score. It wasn't enough. He didn't win the gold medal. But after that, the sport of gymnastics changed forever. That was it. There was no more of the perfect 10. Although the perfect 10 still exists in a gymnastics score. So when you're watching gymnastics on TV right now, you'll see a difficulty score of maybe, let's say, 6.2, and then you'll see an execution score out of 10. So that execution score does exist. So if a gymnast was perfect, they could get 10 out of 10, and if you add that to their difficulty of 6.2, they'd have a score of 16.2. But that gets lost in the confusion of watching gymnastics these days. It's so complicated for me. It's one of the things that really disappoints me about gymnastics now when it's on TV. It's so hard for the average person and the people in the public. They just want to watch the sport to understand the scores. It's really, really tough, because who knows what's the difference between a 14.3 and a 15.4. But when you're looking at a perfect 10, you know that a 9.9 is pretty damn good and a 8.2 is not great. So for me, it's a big mistake of gymnastics to not try and steer themselves back towards the perfect 10. But that's where it changed. It was his routine, because it was so difficult that, he would have had a start value of maybe 11 or 12 instead of 10, and that's where they changed it. So for him, I think his unique achievement was probably that he medalled on 5 different apparatus at an Olympic Games. So Scherbo, I think, medalled on 4 at that Barcelona Games, but Nemov medalled on 5. So the only apparatus he didn't win an Olympic medal on was rings. And I guess a little bit different to Vitaly Scherbo, he really did have a weakness, like a kink in the armour, a weak link in the chain, and that was rings. He was the tallest of all of the gymnasts in my top 3. So Vitaly Scherbo was 169, so pretty much the same height as me, so 5'7", and then Alexi Nemov was 5'8", so 173. I know not giant by any means in any other sport, but in gymnastics he was certainly a tall guy. So he struggled on the rings. His centre of mass and his body was slightly off, so rings was difficult for him. He performed better on rings in the early parts of his career, because back then, again, it was just out of 10 and there wasn't so many athletes specialising on one apparatus. So he kind of was able to keep up there with the top rings workers a little bit more. as his career progressed and he got closer towards Athens, there was then starting to be more specialists coming to the game and, targeting one Olympic medal instead of trying to get an all-around or a team medal. So he then started to struggle and had a lot of injuries to his shoulder. I actually remember him competing at the World Championships. He was the only athlete in this top three as well that never won a World Championship title. So incredibly, he won a silver medal at the Olympic Games all around in Atlanta at 19, and then 4 years later in Sydney he won the gold. So he's Olympic all-around champion, never won a world all-around title. So that's probably one thing in terms of medal tally and career that kind of sets him apart from the other two, because they did win world titles. But he struggled on the rings, and I remember watching him in the World Championships in either 97 or 99. I can't remember exactly which one. He was on the rings and his ring guard snapped, fell off, and that took him out of the race to win a world medal. So, and obviously his World Championship tally was not quite as high. So he won 13 and the other two won 23 and 21 respectively. So a little bit down on World Championship medals, but up on both of them on Olympic medals. And I think the type of gymnast that he was, it was just beautiful. Like, to watch his gymnastics, it really was like artwork. I'd never seen anything like that before. He had that old school USSR, Soviet, Russian style to his gymnastics. His difficulty was incredible. His line was amazing. I used to sit there and, Sergei in the 90s had some very good junior gymnasts that are around the same age as him and a little bit younger. And Sergei would be there at national training camps, and they used to go to Round Lake, which is a national training center in Russia. I had the opportunity in 2009 to go and visit that national training center in Russia, which was an amazing experience. It was a very odd experience, but it was amazing. And that was cool for me, because when I was a kid, I used to say, Sergei, what's it like there? Like, what was Nemov like when he was a kid? What was it like when he was training for the Olympic Games? And he used to tell me stories and tell me what he was like. And yeah, for me, he kind of always seemed like the ultimate gentleman. I think that Athens Olympic Games, where the crowd were booing, ultimately, it was him that calmed the crowd down. He went up onto the podium himself. No one asked him to do it. He asked the crowd to calm down, stop booing, so the next competitor could go and compete, which was an amazing thing to do. He didn't need to do that. So for me, he was almost like he was like the James Bond of gymnastics. He was a cool-looking guy. Kind of had everything. Was a superstar in Russia. Yeah, won all of those Olympic medals. And for me, I think I tried to style a lot of my gymnastics off him. I really used him as a massive inspiration. My favorite ever gymnastics video that exists on the internet is of him preparing for the 1996 Olympic Games. And it's at that training center in Round Lake, and it's his 6 compulsory routines, so the basic routines that everybody would do back then, and then the 6 voluntary routines, and it's just my favorite video to watch. It's just amazing. I'm smiling now because when I was competing and I needed a bit of inspiration, I'd just go watch that video. Even when I was in my late 20s, it's just perfection. Amazing to watch. Incredible gymnast, certainly inspired me. I remember the kit they used to have back then, 2003, 2004. I used to think it was really cool because the Russian Olympic kit was Reebok. And I managed to convince Sergei to ask this young Russian kid that came to train at our gym in Notts. He was on the national team and he had this Reebok kit and we swapped kits, and I was so excited. And I think my mum was a bit embarrassed with me going to the gym in it because it was bright blue. And it didn't look very fashionable, but I thought it was so cool. So I just always wear it to the gym in the mornings. It was very loud, but for me, it was just the coolest piece of kit. It had Russia on the back. You definitely wouldn't be able to walk through Nottingham now with that on the back of your kit. You'd get some shouts off people, I think, given the current climate. But just super inspiring then, watching him. And he retired shortly after that, I think, after the 2004 Athens Olympic Games. I think he was given a compensation by the Russian government because of what happened with the Olympic Games and stuff. So just an incredible athlete. And I do one other story I remember at the 2008 European Championships in Lausanne. The Irish team, strangely, were being coached by a gymnast called Ivana Vankov, another incredible gymnast. And he was coaching them at the time. And I can remember talking to the Irish team and them being like, we just can't believe that he's coaching us. He's like this legend. And at the time, the Irish team, they weren't great, and they were all juniors. It was the junior team. So he's taking them round, and Alexi Nemov came to watch the competition and wanted to have a catch-up with Ivan Ivankov. So just took the Irish team round with Ivan. So like this legend of gymnastics is taking these Irish kids around, and they're just like looking like, what's going on? These two legends are just taking us around. And like at the time, the Irish team weren't good at all. They weren't getting good results or anything like that. Nothing like they're doing now. I remember being so jealous, just like, I wish they'd come and like chat to Sergei and take us around. So yeah, that sticks out to me with the story about Alexi Nemov. But the next gymnast is the one that retired most recently, and he's the only one that I competed with. So I was too young to ever compete with Alexi Nemov and way too young to compete with Vitaly Scherbo. But Kohei Uchimura, his medal tally stands at 3 Olympic gold medals and 4 Olympic silver medals. And World Championship medals, he won 21. So not as many Olympic medals, but more World Championship medals than the other two, which is incredible given that when he was competing, there were a lot more specialists competing in gymnastics. Predominantly as well, his World Championship medals, the gold ones, were all-around events, which is just incredible. And I remember the first time watching him compete, it was the Beijing Olympic Games in 2008. So I was at Little Shore National Sports Centre, and I think at the time there was a junior training camp going on. And at this age, whenever there was any type of training camp, whether it was junior, senior, they used to have a B team, a GB B team at the time. There used to be coaching courses. I would go to every camp and just train with whoever that was there. Sergei would take me along. So I went and I was training with the junior boys, and I was just training for the week. And I can remember sharing a room, and I think we were in the triple room. And when you were training at Little Shore National Sports Centre, you always wanted a triple room because it was a big room with a big open bay window. And everyone would come and chill in the triple room. And I think I was sharing with Courtney and Frank, who were a couple years younger than me at the time. And we turned the TV on at 6 o'clock in the morning to the sound of Mitch Fenner and Matt Baker on the TV. And we watched the gymnastics, and we saw this Japanese gymnast called Kohei Uchimura. Now, at the time, he was only young, 19, and I'd never seen him before. And he was doing the most exciting gymnastics. He was doing techniques that no one had ever seen before. So on the high bar, his action, which is the bit you see before someone lets go of the high bar, when they speed up and they move the bar in different directions, his was so aggressive that when he let go of the bar, it was like another half a meter higher than everybody else. And everything he was doing was perfect. So normally when someone was doing a big skill in gymnastics, if you slowed it down and put it in slow motion, you would see their legs slightly apart, or their legs slightly bent, or their toes not pointed. This guy, even when you slowed him down, it was perfect. It was just unbelievable. So I can remember watching that and just being like, really feeling like we've just seen something new. Like, whoa. Almost like overnight, the level just went up a notch. Like, this guy is an alien. He's on a different level to everybody else. And he came out of nowhere. He wasn't expected to win a medal. There was another Japanese gymnast at the time that, again, was one of my idols, a guy called Hiroyuki Tomita. He was expected to challenge for the title with the Chinese gymnast, but he slipped off the rings, kind of had a bad fall, and Uchimura came out of nowhere and ended up winning the silver medal at 19. Like, incredible achievement. And there's a real trend, You go back, you look at Alexi Nemov winning the high bar, winning the silver medal all around at 19, then going on to win at 23. And I think that's probably where my fixation on the idea that your prime is when you're 23 probably came from, seeing these gymnasts kind of do the same thing. So he wins that silver medal, and the next year, World Championships come along. In 2009, he becomes the world champion at the World Championships in London. Dan Keatons finishes second, Uchimura finishes first. And I think his unique achievement, for sure, is one that I'm not sure will ever be repeated. He between the year 2009, when he won that World Championship gold medal, and 2016 and the Rio Olympic Games, he never lost a gymnastics competition. It's really hard as a gymnastics fan to explain to people that don't know the sport how ridiculous that is. So there are 6 apparatus in men's gymnastics, and if you add up all of the skills you have to perform 50 skills and 1 vault in an all-around competition. So you have to master 51 skills. And, you know, some of those skills can take years to learn. I remember learning a skill on the parallel bars called the under somersault. And for me, I found the parallel bars really difficult. It wasn't natural for me. I really struggled to hold on, to grip on the underbar skills. It took me 4 years to learn that skill. 4 years. And when I say 4 years, I mean 4 years of trying that move every single day before I got it. And I never really perfected it, but I got it to a point where it was very, very good. But 4 years. So to master 51 skills and to go through a competition without making a mistake on one of those 51 skills is so difficult, especially when you're under pressure. Now, to do that from 2009 to 2016 and win 6 all-around World Championship titles and 2 all-around Olympic titles is just bonkers. Like, I don't think now, you know, people really appreciate that. I certainly don't, because you just got so used to him winning everything. I don't think he ever lost a competition in Japan for 10 years. Just the most incredible. And it wasn't like he wouldn't compete. He'd compete in all of the competitions every year, but would never lose. And, you know, having a target on your back like that, like every year there was someone coming for him, trying to beat him. There was a new gymnast finishing second at the World Championships or finishing third, or a new kid on the block. The closest that anybody ever came to beating him was in the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. You know, I've watched that back a few times. And yeah, it's interesting. I think Oleg Vanayev, the Ukrainian gymnast, was very close. You know, I've done an episode recently, the cheating in elite sport. So I'm glad now that obviously Uchimura got that win in the end, but he came literally within a 0.1 almost, a step away from beating him. But Uchimura pulled it out the bag and did his high bar routine and stuck the dismount and became the Olympic champion. And yeah, just the most ridiculous achievement. Back when he first came onto the scene, you know, I probably spent the next 10 years of my life every day going on YouTube and typing Kohei Uchimura into YouTube and then clicking on the filter most recently uploaded to just check. It was like an addiction, just to check if there was a new video of him that came up onto YouTube, just to see it, just to study him. You know, in 2010, it was the first time I had the opportunity to be at a World Championships. I was just 17, and the older guys would go back to the hotel, and I'd say to Sergey, can I stay? I'm going to go and watch the Japanese train. But I was just going to watch him train, and I'd just go and stand in the journalist box, and I'd just watch him. It would be like seeing Messi, just turning up to watch Messi play, like watch him train, watch the way he ties his boots up. It was just like that. I'd just watch everything he did, just study him. He was just incredible. And I think the most incredible performance I ever witnessed in a gymnastics competition was at the 2011 World Championships. So it was my first World Championships. I was 18 years of age. It was a terrible competition for me. I'd gone in there with a stress fracture in my collarbone. We'd performed really badly. But I remember watching him in the all-around final, and this was a big competition. He was trying to be the first gymnast of all time to win 3 consecutive World Championship titles. He was aiming to win everything in an Olympic cycle, so to go undefeated in an Olympic cycle for the first time. And he went there, competed in the all-around, did the most incredible competition, and this was off the back of the 2011 tsunami in Japan. So he was putting quite a lot of pressure on himself. He was saying in the press that he wanted to get a gold medal for Japan to try and kind of like raise the spirit of the country and stuff, because it had been a really sad time. And, you know, it was like a big thing. There was a lot of press there. And, you know, the Japanese crowd are always very polite. You know, they know gymnastics very well and it's quite quiet. But watching him perform and do his high bar routine on the last piece of apparatus, I managed to like say to Max, come on, let's go to where high bar is. And we just kind of like shuffled down the aisle and barged in, and we sat there, watched him, and it's the only time I've ever seen a gymnastics arena give somebody a standing ovation. Like, everybody was on their feet, just applauding this guy for like 5 minutes. And as soon as he landed his dismount, I'll never forget, in the press section, because it was right there by the high bar, there must have been 50, 60 camera lenses, and they were just going just for like 5 minutes. That's when he really became a superstar. Now, at that World Championships as well, I managed to get a really cool poster. So they gave out, every gymnast that was competing, they gave you like a journal, and they gave you a poster, a men's poster and a women's poster for the World Championships, and I kept it. So that's something that, it's just really cool. And it's got Uchimura doing a high bar dismount on it. Really, really awesome. So I kept that from that World Championships. And I'd say the type of gymnast that he was, he's probably the most technically gifted gymnast that there's ever been. So in terms of technique, the best. There's nobody better. Almost technically perfect in everything that he did. In terms of having a weakness, I would say, again, a bit like Alexi Nemov, if he was to have a weakness, it probably would have been rings. Although he competed at a World Championship final in 2011. And I remember in that World Championships final, after he'd won that gold medal, he was in 4 or 5 apparatus finals, and it was like he was having fun. He just turned up and did routines he'd never done before. So he was putting skills in that he'd never competed. He did a triple double on floor. He put a Busnari in on pommel horse. Hardly ever made, occasionally made a pommel horse final, but really went for it, put a Busnari in. On rings, he was doing these incredible strength moves that I've never ever seen him do before or seen him do since. Same thing on high bar, put loads of extra skills in. So that was somebody that could just raise his level at any point. I think he was probably the gymnast of all three that only ever competed a fraction of what he was capable of. He was always training way more difficult gymnastics. And so for me, the type of gymnast that he was, just in terms of technically gifted, just perfection and beauty and consistency and difficulty, he had everything, absolutely everything. And I think his performance at the 2014 World Championships, which for any gymnastics fans out there, even if you've watched it, I'm sure you have watched it. If you've never watched it, go watch it on YouTube. Just type his name in, 2014 World Championships. You can watch every one of his routines. It is the closest anybody has ever come to doing a perfect gymnastics competition. Now, I watched an interview with him in 2013 that the BBC did, and it was translated, and they kind of asked him, you've done everything. He had just won the whole Olympic cycle, become the London 2012 Olympic gold medalist in gymnastics, and they kind of said, what is it now? What are you striving for? And he said, my goal is to have a perfect competition. I remember listening to it and thinking, what? This is a guy that you can't compete against, someone like that. He's not trying to beat other people and be the champion. He's not even on that level. He's on a different level altogether. He was trying to have a perfect competition. What he meant was he wanted to try and stick every single landing. So to get no deductions on any of his landings. And at that World Championships in 2014, he did a perfect floor routine, stuck every single landing. Did a perfect pommel routine, rings stuck his dismount, vault stuck his vault. To stick a vault under pressure is something that doesn't happen very often. And P-bars, did a small hop, just a tiny hop, which is a 0.1 deduction, and then stuck his high bar dismount. So he came within 0.1 of having a pretty much perfect competition. So I think that's the closest anyone has ever come to perfection in gymnastics. And so, I think his strengths for sure were floor, high bar, parallel bars. He was also incredibly good on vault. I mean, he's somebody that I've seen him compete 4 or 5 different vaults. Just had everything in his locker. Was competing on a different level. His brain, I think, he used to say that he would just close his eyes, visualize a skill that he'd never done before, and then just be able to do it. Just amazing, certainly the Messi of gymnastics or the Michael Jordan. Just incredible athlete. Amazing to have competed with him. I competed with him in 2014 at the World Cup circuit out in Tokyo, so it was in Japan, which was pretty cool. Spent the whole time just looking at him, just wow, he's right there, right next to me. I just couldn't really believe it. So I was finding it very hard to focus on my gymnastics. I've talked about it before. I did my high bar routine, and it wasn't the best high bar routine, but it was a very difficult routine. And I probably did one of my best dismounts off the high bar, and I stuck my dismount, and it was almost like a silent landing. It was beautiful. It just stopped there. And when I walked off the podium, he smiled at me and gave me a nod of approval. And I just thought, yes, that's it. That's one of my best moments of my career ever. So it was just amazing to have been able to compete with him. But I think if he was going to have a weakness, particularly later in his career, it was probably his shoulder. And it's interesting, all of these 3 athletes, right? They're very similar. I'd say Nemov, Alexi Nemov and Kohei Uchimura and Vitaly Scherbo, all brilliant on high bar, great high bar workers, brilliant on floor. And I think the two things that probably connect those two apparatus is that spatial awareness, understanding where you are in the air, you know? Certainly courage, bravery with those two apparatus, but doing big skills, having that real understanding of where you are in space and time. And I think that's really important for those two apparatus. Again, all very good on pommel horse, great on parallel bars, good technicians, good on vault as well. Probably Scherbo was probably the best on rings comparatively to the other rings workers he was competing with, whereas Uchimura and Nemov kind of lagged behind the other all-arounders on rings where they were competing, so that was where there was a bit of a weakness for them. But, I mean, overall, yeah, just incredible athletes. But, yeah, interesting how the all-arounders are very similar. And when you think about it, like, in gymnastics, the all-around is the most prestigious. It's the thing everybody wants to win. So whether you're the Olympic champion on floor or rings or P-bar, high bar, vault, everybody has the most respect for the all-around champion because it's the hardest to win. You've got to do 51 skills and you've got to go through a competition without making a mistake. You know, you have to be strong on all the events, all over your body. Upper body strength, lower body strength. You've got to be powerful, fast twitched. You have good spatial awareness. You've got to be able to compete under pressure. You need everything. It's the all-arounder. And when you start out in gymnastics, every kid wants to be an all-arounder. Nobody starts out as a specialist. It's just through circumstance or injuries or your body type that you might specialize on one apparatus. But everybody wants to be the all-arounder. That's what everyone wants to be, the all-around champion. So for me, that's why these three guys are the greatest of all time during my lifetime, because they were all-arounders. Now, I think if we compare them and we look at their careers, you know, because Nemov wasn't a world champion all around, although he had the most Olympic medals, I think that probably sets him apart in that category if we're just looking at medal tally. And then you've got Uchimura that has only 7 Olympic medals, Scherbo's got 10. Scherbo has 23 world, Uchimura only 21, but of those medals, Uchimura had 6 world titles and 2 Olympic gold medals. So the other 2 in the list, they both have an Olympic all-around gold medal, but Scherbo has a bronze in his second Olympics, and Nemov had a silver in his first Olympic Games. But Uchimura has 2 golds. And for me, like, the all-around kind of trumps everything. So those 2 Olympic golds sets him apart, and then the fact that he has the 6 World Championship medals, and they were all back-to-back. I think when you look at career and medals, Uchimura, you have to put him there at the top. I'd then probably put Vitaly Scherbo second, and then I'd put Nemov third. And then I think impact, if I was going to look at the impact that they had on the sport, like when I think about Scherbo, to have won those 6 gold medals in Barcelona, you know, that was a year before I was born. But I think he was pretty much the superstar of that Olympic Games. And I think he probably really like raised the bar in terms of difficulty and what could be achieved. He was an incredible performer and entertainer. His story, I think, after his wife was in that car crash, he kind of lost his way, turned to alcohol, didn't really look after himself. He was one of those gymnasts that when he retired, put on a lot of weight. It was a bit of a running joke that he was turned into this big, massive, overweight, fat guy. I'm sure he was dealing with a lot of demons. But yeah, just an incredible performer. I'd say he's probably, in terms of like the personality and performer, he's the top of that list when it comes to that. And the impact, yeah, I still don't think that achievement of 6 out of 8 gold medals, I don't think that'll ever be replicated. So in terms of just, if it was just taken on one Olympic Games, he would be top of that list. But that was his impact. I think Alexi Nemov, you know, the impact he had on me was massive. You know, I heard someone say recently that the music you listen to between the ages of 7 and like 13 will stay with you for the rest of your life. It's like ingrained within you. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense, because like whenever I hear music that I used to listen to back then, like I still love it now, you know, like it's like it feels almost like home a little bit, like safe and secure. And I think because the gymnastics I watched between those ages was Alexi Nemov, he will probably always be my personal favourite gymnast of all time. And, you know, in 2004, he changed the sport forever. That difficult high bar routine that he did, boom, that was it. Perfect 10 was gone. You know, gymnastics is famous for having the perfect 10, right? Like if you're in a, you know, even if you're with your mates and they do a forward roll or something, or someone falls over and they stand up, they still say perfect 10. When people think of gymnastics, they think of Nadia Comaneci and the perfect 10. That's what people think about when they think of gymnastics, but that's gone now because of his routine at the Athens Olympic Games and what happened. So, you know, he had a massive impact on the sport. He changed it forever. And then when I think about Uchimura, there's just a generation of people my age, and the guys who are a little bit younger than me, that he just changed the game. Like, the levels were just different levels, man. Like, you can't... It was literally like watching somebody that was from another world compete. To have not been beaten for that long, like, it's hard enough to do that for 1 year in your own country. To have done it over multiple years and to win 8 major championship medals, so 8 years in a row, be undefeated. It's just bonkers. You know, when I often see these lists of the greatest of all time athletes compiled, you know, it's tough for me because, you know, no one really understands gymnastics that well because it's not on TV, and it is hard now with the scores to really get it. I think if we still had a perfect 10 and he had got the results he had, he'd be higher up on that list. But gymnastics it's a sport that's not publicised so much. It's not on TV, you know. There's not a lot of money in it. So there's not big global superstars. I know in his own country is like one of the biggest sports stars that there is, and people certainly respect him, but, you know, yeah, for me, just one of the greatest of all time. And when I think about, I often say this to people when they try to compare sports. I said, look, you know, it's really interesting. If you took the Olympic champion from every single sport at the Olympic Games, so there's normally 26 sports, I think. You take the Olympic champion from every single one, and you get them all to do each other's sport, right? The gymnast will be able to do the fundamentals of each of those sports. So he'll be able to shoot a gun, he'll be able to throw a javelin, he'll be able to run around a track, dive into a swimming pool, hit a tennis racket, he'll be able to do all of that, throw a punch. But all of the other athletes won't even be able to do the most basic fundamental skills in gymnastics. The most important skill in gymnastics is a handstand. So how many of those other 26 Olympic champions will be able to do a handstand? Not many, I can't imagine. How many would be able to do a circle on the pommel horse? Or to even get up onto the rings or swing around the high bar? So for me, yeah, I think the all-around gymnastics Olympic champion is a good, accurate representation of the best, one of the best all-around sports. But I'd love to see it. Imagine if they had a game show that happened after the Olympic Games where they got all the Olympic champions from every sport to go head-to-head to find out who was the best athlete. That'd be amazing. So if there's anyone out there watching that's got the power to make that happen, oh, please, because that'd just be the coolest thing to watch ever. So for me, yeah, I mean, the impact he had on our sport was just incredible and just inspired a generation of kids to be on YouTube every week trying to find new videos of him, literally just scouring the internet to try and see what he's learning next, what's he doing next, and just the way he just thought outside of the box and was just incredible. And yeah, amazing to have competed alongside him, trained alongside him, been able to watch him. The fact that he is the greatest of all time for a lot of people, and for me to have competed with him, that's just an amazing thing. I'm going to be able to tell my son one day, right, this is who this guy is, and I competed with him, and show him videos of me competing alongside him. You know, qualifications at the Olympic Games in 2012, I beat him on high bar. So that's one of my crowning achievements as well. So yeah, and for me, actually, it was really interesting. One of the things that I used to rationalise a lot of the shame and the pain I carried around with me after 2012, after I made that fall in the team final, and I still won an Olympic medal, and I couldn't quite work out how that made sense to me, that I'd made a mistake, but I still got a medal. It was him, because he's fell at Olympic Games multiple times. I think at that Olympic Games he had 3 falls. And he's the greatest of all time. So I kind of started to go, well, if the greatest of all time can fall off, and, you know, that kind of, maybe I'm okay. And I hit 7 out of 8 routines at that Olympic Games. And yeah, so for me, yeah, just an incredible athlete. And yeah, when I think the last thing that I'd probably take into consideration, you know, we've talked about the career, the medal tally, talk about the impact on the sport. I think the last thing I'd probably think about is like the character. Obviously, I don't know them personally. I can only go off like stories that I've heard and stuff. You know, in 2017, Vitaly Scherbo was accused of a very violent crime. concerning a female athlete way back in the 90s. You know, I don't know whether that was proven or not. I'm sure someone that watches this and is a gymnastic expert can tell me. But one thing I have learned in my life so far is that, like, you have to be able to separate, like, performances from the person a little bit. That's a hard thing to do, right? You have to do that when you're a commentator or you're trying to act as a neutral. But, like, I love Michael Jackson's music, but I question him as a person and those stories. You know, does that make sense? I love listening to his music. I've got to separate those two. Like, Tiger Woods is the best golfer of all time, but some of his morals and values and ethics, like, I'm not on board with. But you've got to be able to separate the two. And I think, for me, when I'm personally picking the greatest of all time, I do take those things into account, right? Because there's a big part of it. Like, how do they make you feel? How do they inspire you? Like, are they a role model? Do they set a good example? But I don't know Vitaly Scherbo. You know, I wasn't even born when he won those gold medals in 1992, but purely from a gymnastics point of view, which is, you know, where I'm going to be mainly putting my top 3 at the end of this video. For me, I'm going to put Vitaly Scherbo at number 2. So he's number 2 for me. Alexi Nemov, again, don't know much about him. I've only really heard good things about him. I like to think that he's a gentleman anyway. He's a absolute legend. I can take into consideration that thing that he did in 2004 when he calmed the crowd down. He really didn't need to do that. You know, I'm sure he dreamed of winning an Olympic gold medal on high bar and retiring as the double Olympic champion on high bar. So to have been able to do that in that situation, just an amazing thing. And so I think for me, yeah, just an awesome character, someone that I didn't know but I looked up to, and I was always asking Sergei, like, about him. What's he like? What was he like? Sergei would tell me these cool stories. And then I think Uchimura, again, it's interesting, right? Because they say never meet your idols. And I remember being at a party years ago, and it was in London. And when I was a teenager, 300, the film, had come out, and I loved that film, like, with Leonidas. And Gerard Butler was like a legend, right? So he was at this party. I'm like looking across the dance floor. I'm like, that's Gerard Butler. Oh my God. I couldn't believe it, because the little kid in me was like, oh, it's the guy out 300. So I walked up to him and I went, hi mate, would I be able to get a photo? And he turned around and he didn't even look at me. He just looked straight forward and he went, no photos. And I like walked off like gutted, like nearly crying. And I remember we used to train with the Japanese junior team a lot. We used to go on training camps with them. And we were on a training camp in Mexico, and I wasn't here when they had this conversation, but a load of the lads were like chatting to the Japanese juniors who have gone on in themselves to have amazing careers. And we were quite good friends with them at this point, because we'd see them every year for a training camp. And they were using Google Translate, and they were asking him, what's Uchimura like? Because everyone was just fascinated with him. And they said, we'd like you to try and beat him because he's very arrogant. And I was like, I wasn't there, but they told me, and I can remember being gutted. Like, really? And this was coming from the Japanese juniors. And I wasn't there, so I didn't hear it. I didn't read the Google Translate. But they all told me, I can remember thinking, that's really let me down. So again, I have to kind of like compartmentalize and just think about the career. But when I ever met him and shook his hand, he was always super respectful. And actually, for me, I spoke a little bit about that 2011 World Championships, and I've brought it today to show people because it's my favourite piece of sports memorabilia. In 2011, when I went to that World Championships in Tokyo, and he got that standing ovation, and they gave every athlete a poster, a men's and a women's one. I've still got the men's poster, so it's now 2023, so it's 12 years old, this poster. It's got Kohei Uchimura doing a high bar dismount on it. It's got the rising sun behind it. It's a beautiful poster. And for the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, or I think it was actually the Tokyo 2020, the 2021 World Championships. I asked Courtney Tulloch, who's been on the podcast, I said, Courtney, I've got this poster, mate, from 2011. If I sent it to you, if I post it to you, would you be able to take it and try and get Uchimura to sign it? And so he took it all the way to the World Championships, and he managed to get it signed for me. So it's the coolest piece of sports memorabilia I've got. Because for me, my top 3 greatest of all time is Kohei Uchimura at the top, Vitaly Scherbo number 2, and Alexi Nemov number 3. And so this piece of sports memorabilia, at some point, when I'm allowed a man cave, this is going up on the wall and it's going to be framed. It's just the coolest thing that I've got. So I'm very grateful for Courtney for getting it signed. I've bought it today, so I will try my best to try and fit it within the camera, because it's like the coolest thing. I'm not sure what it would be worth. I can't really put a value on it, but for a gymnastics fanatic, I'm sure this would be incredibly valuable. So you should be able to kind of see it there. You can see him doing his high bar dismount, and he signed it right in the middle. It's pretty cool. So that's it. That's the best piece of sports memorabilia that I've got. Yeah, I'd be really interested to know how much it's worth. So if there's anyone out there who wants to put a price on it, can make me an offer. I'm not sure that I would sell it. Definitely one day, if we ever get an awesome studio for the podcast or something, it's going up there. It's going up there. I've also got a signed autobiography by Usain Bolt, so that's pretty cool as well. But for me, this one is way better. It means so much more to me. So yeah, my greatest of all time, Kohei Uchimura, closely followed by Vitaly Scherbo, and then in third place, Alexi Nemov. But all three of those gymnasts, I like to think, influenced my career. I hope that you can see all three of them within my gymnastics. I tried very, very hard to make sure that I tried to replicate all three of them in their different ways. But yeah, they massively influenced my career and so many others that I know will listen to this podcast and they'll enjoy this one. It's been a bit of a light-hearted one. The last few have been, quite deep and getting into really like the politics and the darker side of sport a little bit. So I wanted this one to be a nice, fun, light-hearted one. And, I've never really seen anybody do this, debate the greatest of all time in gymnastics before online. So yeah, really cool to do it. I'd love to know what your opinions are, where you would rank your top 3, whether there's anybody else that I've not included that you'd put in there. So please let me know whether you listen to this video on the podcast. You can still comment on the podcast, so you can do that. YouTube, if you're watching it on YouTube, or listening to it and seeing the clips on Instagram, or wherever you get the clips from the podcast. Yeah, leave me a comment, send me a DM. I'd love to know. But thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe, guys. We've been bringing content out now for, I think this is episode 42 or 43. So 43 weeks. It's been an amazing process. It's hard work, but we both love it, me and Sam. We're going to keep it up. We've got lots of new guests coming. Excited to get into our second year at some point. I mean, that just sounds crazy. Amazing that we've kept it up. Thanks for the support, and I will see you in the next one.